Shalom, Akim, giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bashem, Yahushua Bashem, Lakak, with Dash, double honors to the apostles, elders, great millstone, salute, salutations to the sincere Akim out there of the hopeful elect. All right. Yeah, man, you just, this past week, there's been a lot going on in the news. You know, you got the kid, Carmelo Anthony, who got bailed out of jail for murder, actually. All right. And, you know, white people, they a little upset. They got their panties in a bunch because of that. And but you know, I might do a little video addressing that later. But Gayle King, right, in a crew of whores, you know, now deemed astronauts, because they went up, took a flight in Blue Origin, a little space flight on Blue Origin for about 10 minutes. All right. You're basically a fucking joyride, you know, right within the Earth's atmosphere, you know, so they could take pictures of the planet and you know, promote Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin space flight, you know, for the filthy rich people in this society. Okay. Then they was parachuted back down to the planet Earth. Yeah, and they've been getting a lot of slack, really, you know, a lot of negative feedback for that. You know, for that little joyride in outer space. But because it was Gayle King, Katy Perry, and a couple of other bitches. It was all female space crew. All right, and you know, people saying that wasn't, they saying that wasn't no real space journey, being that you had some astronauts trapped in the outer space for like more than 90 days, and they were just rescued recently. So, you know, these rich celebrities, they're getting, you know, like I said, negative feedback in the comments and all of that from the post interviews that they did when they returned to Earth after being, after floating right above the Earth's atmosphere for 10 minutes. Okay. But the whole point is, you know, it's all promotion for Jeff Bezos, who's, you know, one of the richest people in the world, who's an Edomite, by the way. You know, all you so-called white people, you Caucasians, are Edomites. And the scriptures refer to you as the prince of the power of the air. And that's what I wanted to bring out. So let me read Ephesians, the book of Ephesians, chapter 2, verse 1. It says, "In you has he quickened who were dead in trespasses and sins." Okay, and that's referring to the elect of the nation of Israel, which the nation of Israel is none other than you so-called Negroes, Latinos, North American Indians. All right. But it's in particularly talking about the elect, the chosen out of the nation of Israel, because, you know, most of our people, most of you Israelites, you know, are a bunch of fucking lowlifes, man. You know, you carry yourselves as niggas and spicks and Indians. Okay. And every stereotype that the so-called white man has put on you, you're basically living up to it. All right. So the Lord has an elect, chosen few out of that nation that he that has repented, and he plans on saving and delivering from out of this captivity. All right. So I'm gonna read that again. It says, "In you has he quickened," quickened meaning to make alive. All right. Liven us up, liven up our spirits. Okay, by bringing us into the truth, revealing the truth unto us. It says, "Who were dead in trespasses and sins." Yeah, because, you know, even the elect of the nation of Israel, we all have sinned, you know, brothers that are the hopeful elect, you know, even though we've repented and refrained from doing the worldly things that we used to do, you know, now that we turned over a new leaf and became a new creature in the anointed one, Yahweh Shah, who the world ignorantly calls Christ. Okay. You know, at one time we was all going off, eating pork, you know, doing whatever transgressions against God's holy laws you were doing. Okay. But like I said, you know, through the grace and mercy of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua, you repented. All right. It says, "In you has he quickened who were dead in trespasses and sins, wherein in time past ye walked according to the course of this world." Yeah, we all grew up and was raised in this world, man, in this wicked world that we live in, you know, where most of God's laws are basically overlooked. Okay. You know, like honoring the Sabbath day. You know, a lot of people don't you know, honor the Sabbath day, even the day that they believe to be the Sabbath, right? Like in this society, most people say Sunday is God's day, God's holy day, you know, which is the seventh day on the calendar, on a Gregorian calendar, and they deem that to be the Sabbath day. So people just go to church, and they still, you know, they still indulge in all kind of pleasurable things to their own flesh. Okay, you know, they still cook, you know, they still, you know, do, you know, they do wickedness. They still have sex on Sunday. All right, these are things that you're not permitted to do on the Sabbath day. Okay, but this is the way we was raised up in this world, eating pork, right? Not just pork, but all kind of other abominations that are unholy according to God's dietary law. Okay, that's just the way of the world. All right, it reads on to say, according to the prince of the power of the air. All right, the prince of the power of the air. Okay, now who is that referencing to? The nation of Edom, you so-called white people, you Caucasians. All right, and we know you're the prince of the power of the air. That's why the Lord put that spirit on you devils to really, you know, to really be heavily involved in flight. Okay, whether it be exploring outer space, space flight. You know, you got these rocket ships, you got the International Space Station, or whether it be airplanes and helicopters. Okay, and you know, jet crafts and things of that nature. All right, recently, just what is it, a week, almost 2 weeks ago, a week and about a week and a half ago, you had the tourist, you had a family of tourists, I believe they came from Spain, came over to New York City, and on, I think it was their first day actually in New York, where they, you know, decided to take a helicopter tour of Manhattan, and the damn helicopter crashed into the Hudson River. Okay, all right, and these were so-called white people. All right, but you know, that's why the scriptures refer to them as the prince of the power of the air. Now, I'm not saying so-called black people don't do that. You know, don't take helicopter tours. Most black people not really into that. You know, and most so-called black people, Latinos, we're not really heavily into flying unless we have to, you know, for travel purposes, you know. But just to be, you know, jumping out of airplanes and putting that shit on your bucket list so you could parachute out of planes and such, okay, that's not in our spirit, man, for the most part. Okay, now I'm not saying you don't have jakes that do that, but you got some jakes that look up to the so-called white man and want to do things that the so-called white man does, you know, because they're influenced by these devils. But for the most part, you know, you Israelites, our people, we keep our feet grounded on God's green earth. Okay, even though this place is fucking hell, you know. But a lot of our people ain't doing too much flying and shit just for extracurricular activity. Okay, that's why the so-called white man is the prince of the power of the air. He's into that kind of shit, you know, hang gliding and all that kind of stuff. All right, I'm gonna read it again. Ephesians chapter 2 verse 2. It says, wherein in time past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. Okay, and that's another clue of how we know that this is referring to the so-called white man as the prince of the power of the air, because they're also the children of disobedience. All right, disobedience to what? To God's laws. Okay, here it is in America. They claim to be a Christian society, right? That, you know, that believes in the Holy Bible. Presidents swear in on the Holy Bible. Back in the days, if you know you had court cases and proceedings going, and if you was going to testify, they would make you swear in on the Bible. Okay, and on their currency it says, "In God we trust," on their fiat currency, and also in their courtrooms. All right, but what God is it referring to? It can't be referring to the God of the Bible, because they break all of the laws in the Bible, making them disobedient. So in all reality, the God of the so-called white man has to be none other than Satan. All right, the adversary. Okay, but like I was saying, these devils are the prince of the power of the air. Okay, and you got Gayle King, who is an Israelite, by the way. All right, he's a 2/3 fucking ugly ass bitch. Okay, but nonetheless, she's an Israelite, and as terrified as she was to go into outer space, she still did it anyway. Okay, you know, to do that little joyride into outer space to promote Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos's, you know, his company for space flight tours, all right? Which is only for the, you know, the filthy rich of the society. But I believe it costs like me, I don't know if it's $500,000 or maybe $1 million a flight for 10 minutes to overlook the planet, right? Maybe take pictures and whatnot. They said Katy Perry was up there singing What a Wonderful World. I think that's Louis Armstrong's song, okay? But, you know, she's in outer space, you know, overlooking the earth and singing What a Wonderful World, What a Wonderful World. And they were saying about how it humbles you to be that high up in the outer space and such. You know, so they basically was trying to promote it. Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos's his space flight tours or what have you, okay? And when they came back down to Earth, they got a lot of negative feedback on the comment boards, man. You know, because you know you got people that's frustrated right now. A lot of people can't afford their next meal. They don't know where their next meal is coming from. A lot of people are on the verge of getting evicted out of their homes. A lot of people are basically homeless, okay, really sleeping out of cars and what have you, okay? And then here it is, you got these rich people that's promoting Jeff Bezos' space, Blue Origin space tours that, you know, cost about $1 million just to, you know, float above the planet Earth for about 10, 11 minutes, man. Okay, the nerve of these people, the audacity. But Satan considers you so-called white people the prince of the power of the air, and they'll use a dog-faced bitch like Gayle King to help promote that madness, man. All right, I said that in particular because that's what Snoop Dogg called Gayle King, called her a dog-faced bitch, you know, when they had their little beef going. But I just want to share that with you brothers out there, man. You know, this is just more proof that the so-called white man is the devil and Satan, the nation of Edom, also referred to as the prince of the power of the air. All right, so I'm gonna end it on that note. Say shalom, Baba Rakim to you brothers out there, Lord willing. I'll see you in the next one. Shalom.